Hey guys, in this video I'm going to go over doing some text animation in After Effects. It's going to be a few quick videos, just kind of wrapping up our animation project this week. So I'm going to go over some text and animation in this video. I'm going to make another video where I talk about nesting your compositions, and then I'll make a final video, or maybe I'll put them together, but I'll make another video where I talk about keyframing and interpolation. So there's a lot of different concepts related to animation, but those are a few that I want to make sure to go over this week. I'll also have a video that just goes over submitting the assignment, so exporting your video and then submitting the assignment on OpenLab. So just gonna get into it. I'm gonna move over to After Effects. And so what we're going to look at is adding some text. This is partly because the prompt for this project is animated text and emotions. You don't necessarily have to do it exactly the way I'm doing it, but you can see in the examples they both use text, and we want to look at how animating text is a little bit different than animating other components. So this is the animation that I started last week. Let's just go into full After Effects mode. And so let's zoom in a little bit and we'll just watch. So we have the circle coming into the screen, and then it kind of moves around, and then we have these stars that appear and animate around. And so let's add in some text maybe towards the end after the stars are done wiggling around, maybe around 7 seconds right there. Again, this is just an example. You could do this in many different ways. I am going to move this up a little bit like that, because you're going to see there's a few more properties when it comes to using text animation that we don't have to worry about with our basic shapes, because obviously when it comes to text, we have a bunch of different characters, and we might want to animate those characters. So I'm going to go over the steps for that, and I'm just going to lock up my other layers for now, and I'm going to add in some new footage. So I'm going to right click and go to new and click on text. And so we get this nice text box here. The default for this is really small, so you might not see the text at first. So I think the default text size is something like, I can't remember exactly if it's like 24 or something like that, but it's going to be really small. And so when you type on the screen, you can really barely see it. So one of the first things you want to do is make sure that the text size is visible. So I'm going to set this to like 100, and then I'm going to type in the emotion I'm illustrating, which is madness. And so you can see when I click with the text tool, it just kind of goes into the middle. If I want to move this around, I can grab the move tool and I can move this whole layer around, and maybe I want to center it where this circle is, and it's a white color, so that actually works well for the composition that have so far, because it stands out against that black background, so I can stick with that. You'll notice that this is just a layer. It's not footage like our solid, so this is just a shape layer inside of our program. And so now we can animate this a little bit. So if I go to my madness section, I can also play around with more properties if I want. I can change the fill color here. Maybe if I wanted like a red color, I could do that. I can also add a stroke, which is like an outline, like an Illustrator. So if I wanted to have a stroke, that could be a good way to add a little bit of contrast between other colors that you might have in the scene. Those are a couple options for styling. There's a bunch of other like paragraph and other stuff down here. You can set how far apart the letters are. You can set how far apart the lines are. If you have multiple lines, there's a bunch of stuff like that. You can also change the font. So there's going to be some font options here. You'll notice that if I change the font here, it doesn't actually change my text, or it looks like it didn't go through. Let's change It's not letting me choose the font. There we go. Okay. Okay, that actually did change the text. So if you can have multiple areas of text with different fonts. So that's something that you might want to look out for. But we can choose a font that we kind of, that matches or fits the style that we've got going on. Maybe a little mono font, something like that. And then you also have, this font doesn't have it, but sometimes you have italics or bold or other things like that. And the kind of funny thing about text is you can actually animate basically all of those properties. So let's center this a little bit better. And then let's open up our text keyframes. And so we have the layer transform, which is what we animated last week. And that has all the same properties. So you can, of course, animate I can animate the scale, I can animate the rotation, I can do all the same stuff that I did with my shapes. So feel free to use those properties to animate rather than what I'm going to show now. But because this is text, we do have some more options. And so again, we're going to look at those. So under the text section, you're going to see we can actually animate the source text. That's what this stands for. So if I put a keyframe here and then I move up a little bit and get my type tool again, so I can click on the type tool, or I can just hit T on the keyboard. I could change this. I could, suddenly change this to happiness. Oops. And now it's going to keep both of those. I can also animate like different text properties, various, the fill and all of these different things. I'm not going to do that because I think that'll be a little confusing. But what I want to do is talk about the other animate properties. So I'm going to get rid of this keyframe and come back here and get rid of this keyframe as well. So I'm just selecting it and hitting backspace or delete on the keyboard. Let's look at these animate options. So there's this little animate thing that you don't see in our other layers. You do see some like add thing here, but this has this little animate thing. And so we can make some changes there. So I'm going to click on that. And then we have some different options here. I'm going to go with opacity. So I'll animate the opacity. So the way that this works is a little bit different. Normally, when we animated the background opacity, we chose this opacity option, and then we animated it from 0 to 100. And we can do the same thing here. I can set the opacity to 0. I could, keyframe that, and I could move up a little bit and then animate this up to 100, and we have the same thing. But the difference here with the text is this is going to affect the entire layer or all of the text. And that might not actually be exactly what we want to do. We might want to animate each individual character. So I'm actually going to turn this opacity off for a second, and I'll show you a way we can do that. So I'm going to set the opacity to 0. And this is a little tricky. Maybe, you won't be able to see the text for a while, but you will trust that we'll see it in the end. So then I'm going to open up this range selector. And this is what makes this kind of different, is we can actually affect or set what range of text this affects. And we can animate that. So you'll notice if I move the start value from 0 to 100, it's actually basically saying, don't apply the opacity. So this start is where this change, the opacity here, gets applied. And you can add more properties to this as well. We could do this with the position, scale, all these other properties, fill color, anything else we want to use. There's a blur property, which you could add on there. And then you can also do like a wiggly or an expression. These will change how the characters are being affected. So let's just animate this start property. So I'm just going to keyframe this here. And it's really simple. It's kind of confusing, but the actual thing that we're doing is very straightforward. We're just animating that start property instead of the opacity from 0 to 100. And so now let's zoom in on this a little bit. I'm just going to drag this over. So now we can see, instead of animating the opacity, we're animating which characters use that opacity. And notice that there's a little bit of a fade in. So that's one effect that you can do, but you can also change the effect a little bit, which is kind of nice. So if you like that, you can just leave that as is. And of course we can, change these properties the same we would any other keyframes. If we wanted to go slower, I just move that keyframe over. If I wanted to go faster, I can move this keyframe back. And there we go. And then I could animate it back out if I wanted to. So maybe I would hit another keyframe right there and then animate start back to 0. And so now we've got the text comes in and it goes out. Or the other thing we could do is if we want to go the other way, let's take out this keyframe. We could set the end, or we can even set the offset, which will kind of work together with the start and the end. But there's a lot of different options there. It can get kind of crazy. So let's just leave this as is for now. And then another thing we can change, as I mentioned, is how it applies. So if I go into this advanced section, there's a whole bunch of other things. We can animate all these properties as well. But the ones that I want to look at are, you can change the units based on percentage or index. And that's where we can set the number of characters. So we can start at, and you'll notice now instead of 0 to 100%, it's 0 to 7. So we can start at 7 and then go up to, or we're going to 0, we're going down to, or sorry, we're going from 0 to 7 and then 7 to 0. And so we get kind of the same effect, but we can have more control over just the characters. You can also set this based on words or lines. We only have one word, so that wouldn't really be useful here, but if you had multiple lines, you could do that. You can also change the mode. So if I do something like the minimum value, that's actually kind of hard to see here, but let's see if we do this subtraction value. Yeah, so then we can get the opposite. So it's doing the opposite of what we originally did. So you can really combine all of these different properties together in a lot of really interesting ways. It gets a little confusing and tricky. We could, set this to subtract instead of add, and then we get the opposite of what we wanted. And then you can also do the randomizer. So if you want like a little bit of a more interesting effect, it can randomize the characters. And so you can get kind of a cool effect with that as well. You just turn that on and it goes from going from left to right to just kind of going in a random order. So there's a lot of different, you can see there's a ton of different stuff to play with here. And this is just based on the opacity. You could do this with the position or many other properties. So let's see if I switch out this for position and I just set the position to, let's say, y is -100. Now you're seeing both of those actually at the same time. We get opacity and position. So now they're kind of coming down from this thing, which is kind of nice. So instead of animating a property, we're animating how much that property affects our text. So let's set that to -50. And let's see. So that actually looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just going to leave that as is. So again, there's a million other things that you can do with this. I just wanted to kind of give an example of one. And you can also add animators on top of animators. So you can really go crazy with this. Of course, it starts to get a little confusing after a while. So you might want to, just take it slowly and add a little bit at a time. But yeah, that's some text animation. I'm going to stop here and just go over the next stuff in separate videos. So you can kind of choose which ones you want to look at more in depth or review, just to have a little bit more separation there. So I'm going to stop this video here and I'll start a new one. And in that one, I'm going to go over nesting your compositions.